Greetings, everyone. So you've read one short play, Trifles, by Susan Glaspell. Now we are going to launch into Shakespeare. The play that you are reading is not in your Norton Anthology, but I've given you links to both the written version and an audio version via LibriVox. So as you begin this first week of Shakespeare, I just want you to read Acts 1 and 2, and as you're reading it, you can listen to it being spoken. The LibriVox recording that I've linked in Blackboard is a free recording that's done by actors, and you might find that some of the acting ability is not as great as it will be in the final production that you watch, and that some of the voices that are supposed to be male might be female and vice versa, so not to confuse you. Because this is a 5-act play, like most Shakespeare's plays, I want to give you a brief overview about Much Ado. I've also included a plot summary on Blackboard so you kind of get an idea of the basic premise of the play. So Much Ado About Nothing is a comedy, and it is about a few things. It's about love and courtship. The notion of romantic love was still pretty foreign during Shakespeare's time, and so this idea that people fall in love and get married is pretty unusual. Gender roles, as is often found in a lot of Shakespeare's comedies, there's a lot of cross-dressing, there's a lot of people pretending to be the opposite sex, and a lot of follies ensue because of that, so you will note that in this play as well. There's villainy in the form of Keanu Reeves. There is the notion of how we appear versus how we really are underneath, so appearances. Parent-child relationships, sibling relationships. It's good to note that in Elizabethan society, in which Shakespeare was a part, the eldest son inherited everything. And customs and society. There was a lot to be said for the purity of your line, and so it was important for families to know for sure that the children were products of the husband so that the line could remain pure. So you will see, especially in the dramatic depiction that I have you watch for next week, the treatment of Hero is pretty harsh, to put it lightly, and probably wouldn't necessarily be unheard of in Shakespeare's time. It is important to note that Shakespeare's use of nothing also could be a reference or play on words for noting. Noting is a pun that means you're eavesdropping and gossiping on something, and we see this acted out in the play. It can also be slang for vagina. Take that for what you will. Eavesdropping is very much a plot device used in this play. Some of it is done for good, some of it's not done for good. The two primary couples in this play are Benedick and Beatrice, played by pretty well-known actors, Emma Thompson and Kenneth Branagh. They are the older, more mature couple, and then you have Claudio and Hero. I don't remember the young actor's name, but Kate Beckinsale, a very young Kate Beckinsale, plays Hero. And start to look for kind of commonalities and differences between these two couples. How are they similar? How are they different? Which ones are you rooting for? This slide just kind of walks you through who the characters are and the relationships. Notice that in Elizabethan society, women and servants are placed at the bottom of an acting list, so the higher your position in society, and if you're male, you get billed first, and then women and servants are lumped together. Also notice that everything comes in doubles, basically. There's a lot of doubling and duplicity, so that is definitely a thing to be looking for in this play and other Shakespeare plays. This could technically be considered a tragic comedy, since you have a lot of hijinks, a lot of fun, but also the consequences of some of the actors' actions or the characters' actions are pretty dramatic. There is a death scene, and there is a kind of a redemption scene, so those are pretty heavy topics to occur in a comedy. You know from reading Shakespeare's sonnets from earlier in the poetry section that the language can be kind of chewy and difficult to get your way through, so don't fret if you're not understanding all the references. I know that I still have my thick Shakespeare book from my college days. I've kept it. It's onion skin. The pages are super thin. And it has footnotes that I still need to reference. And I've watched lots of live productions of Shakespeare. And, I wasn't around in the 17th century, so I don't understand all the references to things that Shakespeare makes and that his characters say. And so reading it does give you the advantage of being able to read those footnotes and understand what's going on a little bit better than just hearing it. Shakespeare is known for being bawdy and clever and punny. Lots of plays on words in Shakespeare. There's an example. I don't always get the puns, but I'm sure that they were very funny at the time when Shakespeare was writing it. It is also important to know that sex in Shakespeare's time was treated a little bit differently. Sex was considered a good thing, according to this particular author. And so lots of Shakespeare's plays talk about, especially his comedies, talk about sex, and there's, kind of that nudge, nudge, wink, wink reference to sexual activity. Prostitution was illegal during Shakespeare's time, but as it is today, it is prevalent. It can be found. Nunneries or brothels catered to all tastes, including male prostitutes. Theaters were often associated with prostitution, and so people who hung out there didn't always have a great reputation. So a little bit of a sketchy crowd, if you will. Also, some things to know about love and marriage in Shakespeare's time. Boys could marry at 14, girls at 12, and the common age was 23 and 25 for non-nobles, so a little bit older than I would have presumed. Married couples were expected to have enough money to be able to keep a household. So if you were an apprentice, meaning you were learning your trade, you were not allowed to get married until you were trained and had a job. It was considered foolish, as I said, to marry for love during Shakespeare's time, unless you were on the lower social status. So people who married for love were really an anomaly. They were people who were not like the rest of society. Wealthy families paid high dowries for their daughters, and a marriage contract included a promise to wed, a dowry, and signatures. So it was very much a contract, a passing off of the daughter from the father to the husband. So women were very much treated like property. Everyone was expected to marry and have children. Your children then became your property, and women were the property of the husband. So lots, again, of emphasis on lineage and purity and ownership. Divorce did not exist during this time, and the only way to escape was to die or to run away with your lover and never come back, basically. Annulment only if there was no consummation of the marriage, meaning that if you could prove that you had never had intercourse with your partner, then you could annul it, but otherwise, no. Women were especially vulnerable to sexual slander, so if somebody, in town didn't like you and said that you'd been sleeping around, it was basically on you, the woman, to prove that you hadn't been. So that is, again, why we see in the scene between Hero and her lover accusing her of being unfaithful, why it is so dramatic and the consequences are so dire. Men who could not control their wives were often ridiculed, and they were called cuckolds, and this term repeats itself in lots of Shakespeare's plays. He must have been somewhat obsessed with this idea that if you had a wife who was overly controlling or a wife who was going outside of the marriage to have sex with someone else, you were cuckolded, and because you can't really get divorced, you live your life as a reputation of a man who can't control his wife. So there was a fear of being seen that way. Act 1, you're reading Act 1 and 2 right away. So Act 1, we are understanding where it's taking place, who the primary characters are, and what the conflict is, as most pieces of drama will do. And here's a little synopsis. You have the men coming back from war. It's kind of an exciting time, and you are introduced to the two couples who we're going to focus most on. Then you have Act 2, Act 1, Scene 2. You have Claudio deciding that he loves Hero and making some moves to let her know. And then we have Don John, who is the evil brother, and he just likes to make mischief. And so he's going to make it his duty to cause harm to this budding relationship. So as you begin to read it, try your hand at reading it aloud. It might feel silly, but it kind of gives you the cadence of the piece. And then as I suggest, and I put the link to on Blackboard, listening to it and reading it at the same time is a really great idea. So I hope that helps give you a little bit more understanding of Much Ado About Nothing. You're not going to have as much fun reading it as you will watching it, but please plow through and have yourself attempt to read it as much as you can, and know that you're not going to get all the references, and that's perfectly okay. They will become more clear as you're able to watch it. So enjoy.